Good day. Today's topic is the path to peace in the Horn of Africa, a call for diplomatic engagement. Good day. I am Abebe, and I speak to you not only as an advocate for peace, but as someone who deeply understands the struggle facing my homeland, Ethiopia, and the surrounding region. Today, I want to discuss the possibility of peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea, the wider context of conflict in the Horn of Africa, and why war must be avoided at all costs. My initiative, Ethiopian Hearts for Peace, has long advocated for unity, justice, and reconciliation in Ethiopia. And now it is time for us to consider the path that will lead us to lasting peace, not just for Ethiopia, but for the entire region. The context of tensions in the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa is a region steeped in history with complexities for beyond the surface. Ethiopia and Eritrea, two nations that share deep cultural ties, have been locked in a bitter rivalry for decades. The shared history, marked by the Eritrean War of Independence and the devastating 1998 to 2000 border conflict, has left scars on both nations. These conflicts, although formally ended, have not fully healed. The peace that was supposed to follow the Algiers Agreement in 2000 has remained fragile, and just when there seemed to be a glimmer of hope following the 2018 peace agreement, which is not open to the public, but the two leaders, Ethiopian leader Isaias Afwerki and Ethiopian new leader by then, Abiy Ahmed, have agreed, and tensions have once again flared now. Today, the two nations find themselves on the brink of another war, a war that, if it breaks out, could devastate both sides and destabilize the entire Horn of Africa. Why does peace seem to be so elusive between these two countries? One of the key reasons lies in the complex interplay of regional power dynamics and internal political instability. The Ethiopia, under the leadership of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, has struggled to unite the diverse ethnic groups within its borders. The internal conflicts, particularly the devastating war in Tigray, have undermined the government's ability to focus on external diplomacy. Similarly, Eritrea, under the authoritarian regime of President Isaias Afwerki, remains in a state of military readiness. We say here authoritarian regime because he is labeled as such by the West. And usually the West decides who is authoritarian, who is not, depending on their own personal relations. So forgive me for that. And they call it the dictatorship in Eritrea. But we don't know how the condition of the people are there. But for me, personally, I see Eritrea independent, self-sufficient. Anyways, let's get to the facts. But it is viewed as dictatorship, meaning they want to wage war, and which has fostered an environment of fear and oppression, leaves little room for open, peaceful dialogue. Now, but we cannot ignore the influence of external forces either. Neighboring countries such as Egypt, Sudan, and Somalia have their own vested interests. Egypt, for instance, has long been a key ally of Eritrea, largely due to its concerns over Ethiopia's construction of the Grand Ethiopian Resonance Dam, GERD. In fact, Eritrea has got its independence because of Egypt's help. When Ethiopia is landlocked as it is now, economically it will be paralyzed, therefore it can't develop the Blue Nile. With a swift action by Ethiopian side, The Grand Ethiopian Resonance Dam is now built and it's still standing. This affects the flow of the Nile, they say. So they don't like that. Sudan, now embroiled in its own political crisis, has at times used its proximity to Ethiopia to position itself in opposition to Ethiopia's military maneuvers. These two countries, if you look at them historically, Ethiopia was supporting the South Sudanese for decades, and they become separate countries. And Sudan, in return, were supporting TPLF and ELF. Now, ELF, meaning Eritrea, is an independent country, and Sudan has played a key role there with Egypt. Meanwhile, Somalia, historically at odds with Ethiopia, has formed an alliance of its own, further complicating the situation. In short, the Horn of Africa is a power cake of competing interests, historical grievances, and external ambitions. So there is a risk of war, and there is a need for diplomacy. Despite all of this, the truth remains that war will only bring more suffering and devastation. The Horn of Africa has already seen the devastation of civil war, famine, and conflict, and a renewed war between Ethiopia and Eritrea would plunge the region into deeper chaos. The military buildups along the Asa border near the Afar region are deeply troubling. Ethiopian troops are positioning themselves close to Eritrean territory, and Eritrea has already begun fortifying its defense. If this conflict erupts, it will not only claim the lives of thousands of innocent civilians, but will likely spill over into neighboring countries, further destabilizing the entire region. As we know it, in the Red Sea, United States is bombing the Houthis that's 60 kilometers away from Eritrea, and they are using Red Sea to attack Yemen and Iran. In the face of such dire consequences, I believe that diplomacy is the only path that can lead us to a lasting solution. The idea of diplomatic engagement may seem idealistic to some, especially given the history between Ethiopia and Eritrea, but it is through dialogue, negotiation, and a genuine commitment to peace that we can break the cycle of violence and build a future of cooperation. Ethiopia and Eritrea must not engage in war, for the consequences will be far-reaching, affecting not just their citizens, but the future of the entire region. So, what should be the role of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace, EHP? As the founder of Ethiopian Hearts for Peace, I have seen firsthand the toll that conflict takes on individuals and communities. My initiative was born out of a vision for a unified Ethiopia, one where all ethnic groups can coexist peacefully and where justice and reconciliation can pave the way for lasting peace. EHP advocates for justice, for past atrocities, reconciliation, and the need to heal the wounds of history. But we also understand that peace cannot be achieved through force or military might. The solution lies in engagement, in dialogue, and in acknowledging the humanity of the other side. To those in Ethiopia and Eritrea, I say this: war is not the answer. A military solution will only deepen the wounds of a history and push us further away from peace. So diplomacy is our only hope. We must come to the table, not with weapons in hand, but with desire to listen, understand, and build a further future together. The 2018 peace agreement showed that such a future is possible, even if it seemed fragile at the time. It is time to pick up where we left off, to renew our commitment to peace, and to find ways to live in harmony once again. I would like to extend a little bit and look at the larger implication of the Horn of Africa. The implication of a renewed war between Ethiopia and Eritrea extends far beyond these two countries. Sudan's instability, already exacerbated by the military coup, could shift the region's balance of power. And Somalia, despite its alliances with Egypt, has its own political turmoil to contend with. And a regional war would only make it harder to address those issues. Egypt, too, stands to lose much in a conflict. While it has long been a supporter of Eritrea, a destabilized Horn of Africa would severely disrupt the balance of power in the Red Sea and the Nile Basin. The United Arab Emirates, with its interests in Eritrea, could further complicate things by pouring more resources into one side of the conflict. Remember, a resource waste also is for Egypt. Egypt is also supporting factions in Libya. Libya is no longer a functioning government. So it could spill over to Egypt too when it is distracted this way. The impact on the humanitarian situation cannot be overstated. Both Ethiopia and Eritrea have already endured massive displacement, famine, and poverty in recent years. War would only exacerbate these issues. Entire communities would be displaced, and the already dire condition would worsen. The international community, which has struggled to address these challenges, must recognize that the Horn of Africa is at a breaking point. The political dynamics and key actors in the region. We must also understand the broader geopolitical dynamics at play. In addition to the internal actors, the Horn of Africa is heavily influenced by external powers. The United States, China, and the European Union are all invested in the region with varying interests. The United States has historically been an ally of Ethiopia, with both nations cooperating on security matters, especially in the fight against terrorism. However, the US has also expressed concerns over human rights violations in Ethiopia, particularly during the Tigray conflict. China, on the other hand, has invested heavily in infrastructure projects in the Horn of Africa, particularly Ethiopia and Eritrea, seeking to expand its influence. The European Union has often played a role of peacekeeping and providing humanitarian assistance, but their influence remains limited in shaping the region's political landscape. Meanwhile, regional powers like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have interests that extend beyond more diplomatic engagement. Saudi Arabia is deeply invested in Somalia, and its influence over the Horn of Africa is tied to strategic interests in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the fight against terrorism. The United Arab Emirates, which has a military base in both Eritrea and Somaliland, plays a critical role in shaping the regional balance of power. The key point here is that while Ethiopia and Eritrea might feel isolated in their decision-making, they are very much part of a larger geopolitical game. Their actions are not only influenced by internal politics, but also by the shifting interests of global and regional powers. So here at EHP, we call for restraint and dialogue because this is not their fight. In conclusion, it is my firm belief that peace is still possible, but only if we choose diplomatic over war. Ethiopia and Eritrea must not repeat the mistake of the past. The temptation to escalate tensions may be strong, but we must resist it. The cost of war, in terms of human life, resources, and regional stability, is far too high. Instead, let us look to dialogue, mediation, and the spirit of reconciliation that has brought peace to other parts of the world. As Ethiopian Hearts for Peace continues to push for unity and healing in Ethiopia, I call on both Ethiopia and Eritrea to put aside their differences, to seek a peaceful resolution, and to embrace the opportunities that diplomacy offers. The people of Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the entire Horn of Africa deserve a future of peace, stability, and prosperity. So I say, let us work together, not just for today, but for the generations to come. I would like to bring another war not too far. It's like 60 kilometers from Eritrean shore. The war in Yemen is deeply tied to the Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict, as well as to broader geopolitical struggles involving Israel, Syria, and Libya. These connections emerge from overlapping interests, proxy conflicts, and strategic positioning by both regional and global powers. Let's break it down. The Yemen conflict and its impact on Ethiopia and Eritrea is as follows. The war in Yemen is primarily between the Iran-backed Houthis and the Saudi-led coalition, which includes the United Arab Emirates, UAE. Remember, UAE is playing everywhere. This conflict directly affects Ethiopia and Eritrea in several ways. Eritrea's military role. Eritrea has been a strategic partner of the UAE and the Saudi Arabia in their war against the Houthis. The UAE leased Eritrea's Asa port as a military base to conduct operations in Yemen. These gave Eritrea financial and diplomatic backing from the Gulf states, making it more assertive in regional conflicts, including tensions with Ethiopia. Ethiopia's balancing act. Ethiopia, on the other hand, has maintained a more neutral stance, though it has engaged in trade and security cooperation with both the Saudis and the UAE, and they are purchasing large and vast agricultural, mining, and real estate lands. However, given the Ethiopia's ties with Iran, which supports the Houthis, Ethiopia risks being seen as a potential adversary by Gulf states, complicating its position, meaning United States also can view it as such, although United States don't like Eritrea at all. Weapons and militias flowing into the Horn of Africa is a fact. Weapons from Yemen's war often find their way into Ethiopia and Eritrea, Sudan through arms trafficking networks, and Somalia too. The Tigray conflict in particular saw an influx of weapons linked to the Yemen war, affecting Ethiopia's internal conflicts. So, the Houthi drone strikes and Red Sea tensions is something we have to talk about. The Houthis, backed by Iran, have launched drones and missile strikes into Saudi Arabia and even towards Eritrea as a base when the UAE was stationed there. Right now, they are attacking ships, mainly United States warships with missiles. Given that Ethiopia is now increasing its naval ambitions, with Eritrea controlling most coastal areas, the possibility of Ethiopia being drawn into Red Sea security issues is high. And number two, let's look at the Israel connection and Red Sea and proxy wars. Israel has a strong interest in the Horn of Africa due to Red Sea security and its rivalry with Iran. Remember, Israel also thinks that the Promised Land is further larger than the Israel today. That includes some part of Red Sea, and including some places in Amhara by Bahar Dar, the origin of Blue Nile, going to Egypt, then to Turkey, so the whole other, that's another topic. Anyways, Israeli military presence near Eritrea is believed to have intelligence facilities in Eritrea, monitoring Red Sea shipping routes and Iranian movements. Eritrea benefits from this by gaining quite diplomatic support from Israel. Iran and Houthis as a threat to Israel. Now, since Iran backs the Houthis, Israel sees Yemen's war as an extension of Iran's power in the region. Israel has supported Saudi and UAE efforts to counter the Houthis because the Houthi-controlled Yemen could allow Iran to threaten Israel's naval routes. So Ethiopia's relationship with Israel now should be discussed, correct? Ethiopia historically maintained good relations with Israel, receiving military and intelligence support. However, given Ethiopia's growing ties with Iran, Israel may view this with concern. 3. The Syrian connection, proxy wars and fighters in the region. The Syrian conflict, like the Yemen war, is part of a larger Iran versus Saudi Arabia and US-backed Iran's struggle that indirectly ties into Ethiopia and Eritrea. Eritrean mercenaries in Syria and Yemen are also reported. Reports have surfaced that Eritrean fighters were recruited by Gulf states and sent to both Syria and Yemen to assist in their wars. This has strengthened Eritrean ties with Gulf states. And Ethiopian historic tie to Syria and Iran. Ethiopia had good relations with Syria under Bashar al-Assad, and Iran has attempted to build its influence in Ethiopia, especially with infrastructure and arms deals. So there are foreign fighters flowing into Africa. Okay, after ISIS defeat in Syria, many foreign jihadists fled to unstable regions in Africa, including Libya and the Horn of Africa. Some of these fighters have ended up in Ethiopia's conflicts, further destabilizing the country. 4. The Libya connection, the spillover of mercenaries and weapons. Libya, like Yemen and Syria, has been a battleground for proxy wars. And this has been direct implications for Ethiopia and Eritrea. Libyan weapons in the Horn of Africa. Since Libya's collapse in 2011, weapons have flown from Libya to different parts of Africa, including Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. These weapons have ended up in conflicts like the Tigray War and Sudan's ongoing civil strife. UAE's roles in Libya and Eritrea is that the UAE has backed General Khalifa Haftar in Libya and has also provided military support to Eritrea. Eritrea's close relationship with the UAE ties it into the Libyan conflict, as UAE-backed forces in Libya receive logistics and weapons from Eritrea. So you can see how complex this is. Sudan's fighters in Ethiopia and Libya. Sudan's militia have fought in both Libya and Ethiopia, further complicating regional dynamics. Some of these fighters, who were previously hired as mercenaries by Gulf states for Libya, have now returned to Sudan and Ethiopia, where they are involved in current conflicts. Also in Sudan, we have Tigrayans fighting. Now let's take a look at the grand picture. The Horn of Africa as a battleground for global rivalries. That's my worst fear. Ethiopia and Eritrea are entangled in larger political conflicts due to their strategic location. The key players involved include Iran versus Saudi Arabia and UAE, proxy war in Yemen, Red Sea, Israel versus Iran, Eritrean-Israeli ties, Iranian influences in Ethiopia, and then you have Turkey and Qatar versus UAE and Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia and Somalia versus Eritrea and Sudan type of thing. Because Turkey and Qatar, Russia and China versus the West. Russia and China support Ethiopia, while the US pressures Eritrea. Conclusion: Ethiopia and Eritrea must avoid being pawns in these wars. The conflict in Yemen, Libya, Syria, and Israel, Iran, tensions all have ripple effects on Ethiopia and Eritrea. The challenge for Ethiopia and Eritrea is to avoid being used by external powers in these rivalries. And instead of being drawn into proxy wars, the Horn of Africa must prioritize regional diplomacy, economic cooperation, and security independence. Ethiopia's future depends on navigating these geopolitical minefields carefully. Eritrea, with its history of alliance with the Gulf states and Israel, must decide whether it will continue to serve as a military pawn or seek a broader regional peace. The war in Yemen is not just a distant conflict, it is part of the same wave of power struggles that define Ethiopia and Eritrea's future. Hang on, let's take a look at the wars driven by Wahhabism, ISIS, and Al-Shabaab in Africa are deeply connected to geopolitical struggles involving global and regional powers. These conflicts not only shape local politics but also intersect with Ethiopia and Eritrea's tensions, as well as the broader power struggles between global actors like the US, China, Russia, the Gulf states, Turkey, and European powers. Africa's jihadist wars, if you take them, who supports them? Who supports who? ISIS and Al-Qaeda affiliates strive in Africa and stable regions, including Al-Shabaab, Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, ISIS, West Africa, Nigeria, Sahel, ISIS, Mozambique, Cabo Delgado, and Al-Qaeda linked GNIM in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These groups often receive indirect support from Gulf donors, smuggling networks, and weak governments. Gulf powers, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. Saudi Arabia and UAE have historically funded Wahhabi institutions, indirectly fueling extremism. Qatar and Turkey back Islamist political movements, example the Muslim Brotherhood, which sometimes overlap with extremist networks. So Western and Russian influence is there too. The US and France have military bases across Africa, mainly targeting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Russia, on the other hand, has Wagner Group, has deep involvement in Libya, Sudan, and Mali. presenting itself as anti-Western security alternative. And number two, let's see Ethiopia-Eritrea wars and jihadist expansion. Ethiopia has historically been a bulwark against Islamic extremism in the region. However, the country's ethnic conflicts and instability make it vulnerable to jihadist infiltration. Al-Shabaab has repeatedly tried to expand into Ethiopia, exploiting local grievances in Somali region. What's Eritrea's role in all? Eritrea has cracked down on Islamists in the past, but its isolationist policies and border tensions with Ethiopia could allow jihadists to exploit gaps in security. If war breaks between Ethiopia and Eritrea, Al-Shabaab and ISIS could take advantage of the chaos. Somalia and jihadist nexus is like Somalia is the epicenter of jihadist activity in the Horn of Africa. The Ethiopia-Somali-Egypt alliance has geopolitical consequences as Egypt's military pact with Somalia could increase tensions with Ethiopia. Eritrea has trained Somali troops, complicating the regional balance. 3. How geopolitical powers play into the South into the African jihadist wars. China is primarily focused on economic influence, but jihadist trades to Chinese investments, example Nigeria and Kenya, could change that. Russia, Wagner Group, and the US are competing for security dominance in Africa, using conflicts like Sudan and Libya as battlegrounds. France's military withdrawals from the Sahel have left a power vacuum that jihadists are exploiting now. So let's see the Ethiopia-Eritrea war and global implications one more time. If Ethiopia and Eritrea go to war, it would destabilize the Horn of Africa, giving jihadist groups more room to operate. And also, it involves global players, as Eritrea has ties with Russia, while Ethiopia balanced between the US and China. So it threatened Red Sea security, impacting global trade and oil routes. Now, the question is, can peace be achieved? Ethiopia and Eritrea must prioritize diplomacy over war to avoid becoming another proxy battleground for global powers, allowing terrorist groups to expand under the cover of war, weakening their economic and regional influence. So, I say this, a strong Ethiopia-Eritrea peace framework would stabilize the region and deny jihadist groups the chaos they thrive on. Before we conclude this presentation, I would like to show the fragmentation of Ethiopia and its consequences on extremist alliances and geopolitical shifts. If Ethiopia were to fragment, it would not only redraw the map of the Horn of Africa, but also have severe security, geopolitical, and economic consequences for the region and beyond. The collapse of Ethiopia as a unified state would invite external interventions, empower extremist groups, and create new alliances that would reshape power dynamics in Africa and the Middle East. It also creates internal chaos. It's just a failed state scenario. If Ethiopia disintegrates, the most immediate outcome would be ethnic-based armed conflicts between different factions, leading to mass displacement and humanitarian crisis. The war will never stop. And then there will be multiple warlords or regional strongmen emerging, similar to Somalia in 1990s, or Ethiopia's its own story. And there will be a lack of central authority, creating a power vacuum that foreign and extreme actors would exploit. And then there will be economic collapse with major infrastructure, trade industries falling into despair. With no medicine and food, a lot of people could die due to starvation, malnutrition, and what have you. Redrawing the Horn of Africa map will be one of the other scenario. A broken Ethiopia will lead to new unstable mini-states that could seek foreign backers for survival, leading to new proxy wars, trigger secessionist movement in Eritrea, Somalia, Sudan, and Kenya, destabilizing the region. Change control over vital resources, such as the Nile, leading to heightened tensions with Egypt and Sudan. The other is that when this happens, extremist gains, how jihadist groups would expand. If Ethiopia fragments, extreme groups like Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and other radical Islamist factions would take advantage of the chaos. The absence of a strong Ethiopian state would allow Al-Shabaab to extend its reach from Somalia into Ethiopia's Somali and Oromia regions. And it also enabled ISIS and other jihadist groups to exploit Ethiopia's Christian-Muslim tensions and radicalize disillusioned youth. Also, it creates terrorist-controlled safe zones, similar to how ISIS established its caliphate in Iraq and Syria. It also encourages foreign jihadist fighters to infiltrate Ethiopia, seeing it as a new battleground. So this would make Ethiopia resemble part of Syria, Libya, and Yemen, where failed states lead to warlordism and jihadist enclaves. And new alliances and geopolitical shifts can occur. Foreign powers divide and conquer. Egypt would likely support secessionist factions in Ethiopia to permanently weaken its control over the Nile. Turkey and Qatar would back Islamist-oriented factions within Ethiopia, similar to their role in Libya. United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia might strengthen alliance with anti-Islamist factions to counterbalance Qatar and Turkish influences. And then you have Russia, via Wagner Group, would use Ethiopia's collapse to expand its military foothold in the Horn of Africa. The US and France would focus on counterterrorism but might struggle to contain the chaos. So it is in their best interest Ethiopia stays one. Then Eritrea's position, strategic expansion or total isolation. Eritrea could either expand its control over parts of northern Ethiopia, example Tigray and Afar, or face total isolation if a jihadist or Western-backed phase dominates Ethiopia's new power dynamics. If Eritrea intervenes aggressively, it risks becoming the next Yemen or Syria, facing endless war. So you can see Eritrea does not want any war at this moment. Which means if the diplomatic door is open, Eritrea will be very happy to deal with Ethiopian government. Sudan's crisis worsens. If Ethiopia collapses, Sudan's ongoing war between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and Rapid Support Forces, RSF, would spill over. Sudan might absorb Ethiopian refugees, but could also fall deeper into war, further attracting foreign intervention. So now we've seen so many things. I'm sure you all who are listening patiently, you can see the power dynamics. How is this reshaping global geopolitics in general? The Red Sea becomes the new Middle East. A fragmented Ethiopia combined with Sudan's instability and Eritrea's uncertain role would turn the Red Sea into a new battleground for global powers. The US, China, Russia, and Gulf states would compete for influence over key ports and trade routes. Yemen Houthi rebels could expand operations into the Horn of Africa, linking conflicts across the region. And then you have African Union and regional organizations that will be weak. Ethiopia's collapse would weaken the African Union, there's no doubt, since Ethiopia hosts its headquarters and has historically been its backbone. So the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, like IGAD, which focuses on peace in East Africa, would struggle to mediate new conflicts. As it is weak. The war economy expands. Just like in Libya, Syria, and Afghanistan, Ethiopia's collapse would create a black market economy fueled by arms smuggling, human trafficking, and warlord-controlled territories. Foreign mercenaries and private military contractors, like example Wagner, Blackwater-like groups, would flood the region, turning Ethiopia into a new global conflict hub. So, in all, is peace still possible? Ethiopia needs to avoid Syria-like style collapse. For Ethiopia and Eritrea, diplomatic engagement is the only way to avoid mutual destruction. If they go to war, they risk creating a power vacuum that will be filled by ISIS, Al-Shabaab, and foreign-backed militias. The regional economy will collapse, and Ethiopia's breakup will make all neighboring countries weaker. Foreign powers will use Ethiopia's collapse to turn the Horn of Africa into another Middle Eastern war. Perhaps, knowing what kind of person the Prime Minister of Ethiopia is, perhaps it is his strategy. If you assume evil that I am thinking. Because some people call the current Prime Minister of Ethiopia as evil. What Ethiopia and Eritrea must do: prioritize political dialogue instead of conflict, strengthen border security together to prevent foreign-backed militias from taking over, use diplomacy to counter foreign interference rather than engaging in war that would weaken both nations, invest in economic cooperation instead of military escalation. Two nations know each other. They are not foreign to one another. Easy, right? So I know my role. I know my affiliation role. But what should be the role of the Ethiopian people? The Ethiopian people must resist fragmentation, as it would benefit foreign actors while beginning destruction to Ethiopia itself. Political movements, diaspora communities, and youth must pressure leaders to avoid war and pursue peace. We say this again and again: Ethiopia stands at a crossroads. Peaceful reform or total collapse. If the country disintegrates, it will turn into another Syria or Libya, ruled by militia and extremists. Redraw the African geopolitical landscape, creating new wars and alliances. Threaten global security with terrorist groups using Ethiopia as a new base. Lead to mass displacement and humanitarian catastrophe affecting millions. The Ethiopian and Eritrean leadership must understand that war is not an option. The alternative is not just a conflict between two countries, it is destruction of an entire region, turning it into a battlefield for extremist groups and foreign interests. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, the Horn of Africa stands at the edge of a knife. The choice made today will determine whether Ethiopia remains a unified nation or become another shattered battle like Syria, Libya, or Yemen. War is not just a conflict between two nations, it is a doorway to chaos that once opened cannot be easily closed. If Ethiopia and Eritrea go to war, the consequences will be far-reaching. The region will descend into endless bloodshed. Foreign powers will carve up the land for their own interests, and extremist groups will thrive in the ruins of collapsed states. Entire communities will be displaced, economies will collapse, and the Red Sea corridor will become a war zone where superpowers fight their proxy battles. Ethiopia's fragmentation will not just weaken Ethiopia, it will pull Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, and Eritrea into a spiral of destruction, creating a disaster and the world has never seen before. But there is still time. Diplomacy, dialogue, and unity can prevent this catastrophe. The people of Ethiopia and Eritrea must demand peace, resist division, and refuse to be pawns in geopolitical chess game. Leaders must step back from the brink before it is too late, because once war begins, there will be no turning back. To those listening, do not wait until the flames are at your doorstep. If war erupts, where will it be? No safe place, no stability, no future for generations to come. The choice is now, and the time is now. May peace prevail, and may wisdom guide the leaders before history repeats itself in the worst possible way. Thank you.